Hello.
Morning.
Good evening.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, so I see that the recording is on. We'll wait probably 2 more minutes or so, and then we will begin. Okay, so I think this will be a good time to start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our contributors meeting. My name is Reggie, and I will be running this meeting today. So let's share the document and begin. All right. First of all, thanks to Nitish and to Patroklos for being on triage this week. This probably will be a good place to ask who wants to volunteer for next time. I will volunteer myself to be the secondary. Does anyone wants to be primary for next week?
I actually think we can bump you up to primary, Reggie. I mean, at this point, I think when we added you as a secondary, it was like before you were a maintainer. We just never bothered to update it. So
And let's be very honest, this thing about primary and secondary doesn't make a lot of sense.
I think it's really just to make it so that people would feel comfortable volunteering because they can volunteer as a secondary, knowing that there's somebody with a little bit more experience that can help them out. But yeah, there's that. For those that are listening, in reality, if you're thinking, "Oh man, I'm not qualified to be on this list to take on the," no. We just it's as big or as small as you make it. You know, spending time looking at issues and giving comments and raising flared red flags. We're not expecting. Anyway, so feel comfortable to volunteer.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Kanika. So I can see that you're volunteering for secondary. Thanks a lot. Okay. First of all, let's look a bit what we have accomplished this week. So yeah, we have pretty good amount of. First of all, we didn't have that many issues open this week, which is nice. It's not that of a big amount. We have a decent number of open PRs and of closed PRs as well, which is nice. And thanks to everyone who reviewed and merged PRs this week. And with that, we can go and discuss the issues from triage. Patroklos, do you want to start?
Yeah. I've got a couple of issues. The first one is a bug that has several thumbs up. So I thought that maybe it's worth presenting here, and maybe someone can have a look next week. The thing is that upset generator doesn't work properly when we're using the Git repo with the SSH. I haven't got the time to reproduce it, but it seems that several people are having the same problem, judging from the thumbs up, and you can see the errors on the log files. Yeah, I mean, maybe we should have a look soon and see if it is something that is on Argo side or something that configuration side or whatever, because I see that in a few days there are 4 thumbs up. I don't see that frequently.
Yeah, indeed. Okay.
I don't know if these 4 are actually people having the same issue, or they believe that if this is happening, then we should fix it. In any case, there are already a few that would like to see it fixed.
Yeah, I think generally, if there are a couple of thumb ups, I think at least from my experience, it means that people, that additional people
Yeah.
have this issue. So, yeah, okay. So thanks for bringing this to our attention.
Yeah, that's the one which is. It looks to me like a bug that might annoy some users. And the other one, probably Nitish is right. It's not a bug. It's a feature request. I'm happy to move it down the discussion path and allow people to present their own issues.
Oh, the second one.
Yeah, it's not a bug. It's a feature request. So I'm happy to move it down. And if we don't have time, maybe next time discuss.
Okay, sure, no problem. Thanks, Patroklos.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we have an issue from Aditya. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right.
Yeah, it's right. Hello.
Hi, Aditya.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, no.
So this is a very small proposal. So for the hydrator in a hydrated manifest, we in manifest.yaml we have the like the destination of those resources like namespace where it's going to get deployed is there, it's covered, but there is nothing where the root application which is deploying these resources, the destination where it's getting deployed is not covered where anyone. So this proposal is to add a destination section in hydrator.metadata to add the destination where like the server and namespace or cluster where the root application will get be deployed, and it will be very too much useful in the case of app set where the root application is deploying 4 or 5 application. So though every applications may get deployed to the different clusters, so it will be very useful to have this all thing covered at the same location, so that if we are using some external tools which depends on knowing the actual destination, it can trust the same source of information for all of its work.
So we're talking about
So
setting this setting the namespace in the target cluster, not in the actual. I mean, the namespace not in the actual manifest that the hydrator generates, but in the hydrator metadata, right?
yeah, to just for the information purpose to get the users know that okay, where the application is actually deploying all these things.
Okay, I'm not very familiar with the hydrator yet. Is there anyone who wants to comment on this?
I'm hesitant because so far there's been a really clean separation where the hydrator is concerned with manifests and other components are concerned with deploying them. But we do have a mechanism for basically constructing a README so that users can learn things about the applications or things that are involved in a particular set of manifests. I can imagine that README having access to the application spec or the templating logic that generates that README, having access to the application spec. I think that something more generic like that would be preferable to just hard coding injection of the destination block.
I was actually confused between like where to put this on, either in README file or the metadata file. Like, but I thought that if we put that in the hydrator.metadata file, then in a JSON format, then it will be easier for some if we construct some CI/CD tool, then it will be easier for them to catch this information from the hydrator.metadata file. It
Yeah.
will serve the both purpose.
And the way I've viewed the JSON file is that it's basically, it represents the input to the template engine that generates the README. So if you want it in the README, you kind of probably have to have it in the JSON. But then we're in a position of sort of picking and choosing what information we inject. Like, is destination enough? Are people going to want like arbitrary text that they could inject? Then are there security concerns around that potential arbitrary text? I don't know. I think that to support this feature, I'd want a stronger user story. Because right now we have sort of the user wants to know where the app is going. And if I'm a user, what I really want is a link to the Argo CD application so that I can go look at that for myself. The other user story is maybe we have a CI/CD job that needs that information, but there aren't many details about that use case here. So I don't know if that's just one person has that or potentially lots of people have that use case.
For me, personally, the second one, like a CI/CD job, which require information for the app's destination, is required. So for me, that's a use case that I have that is not being currently served by the existing thing.
So, I mean, if you
If
have a link to the application, then you can do a get on the app and get that information in more details. So as Michael said, all you need is really a reference to the actual application.
sorry,
But the name of the
no,
application doesn't have the URL, right? So he needs to know where the Argo CD instance that is deploying that application lives. So this information is required. So the application name is not enough.
Well, I think he's saying a link. Like, I think we can reliably generate a link on the Argo CD side and then inject the link.
Yeah.
And that would be enough.
Would the link work in your case, Aditya?
I'm not sure. It's not right now. Will be able to extract the destination information from that link by writing in some script or?
You'd have
I
to.
guess the question is why you need the server URL and not the Argo CD URL in your use case.
In my use case, I just want to know the cluster name or the namespace name and the namespace name so that I can run some sort of the restrictions for the PR to get merged to the some specific clusters or namespaces.
So you have some sort of policies that are based on namespaces and servers that you want to apply,
Yes,
and you
yes,
need to extract
yes,
this from somewhere.
yes, yes.
Right. Yeah, that's I guess what Michael means about having a use case clearly defined here, so we can understand the yeah, what are your requirements, right?
Yeah. So this is the exact my requirement that we have some sort of policy for the some specific namespaces or the clusters. So I want the exact name of the namespace or the cluster so that the jobs can run the validation process for those applications.
And if like 5 different users were saying we all need this destination injected for either this purpose or for other purposes, I would say, cool, inject the destination. But with just one user with one use case, I don't think it makes sense to design a feature around that use case. If we design a feature to inject application information, I think that it should be generic enough to satisfy more common use cases, like users just wanting information about the application or potentially a link to the application. In other words, I think I would be in favor of rejecting the proposal if it's just the destination just for the CI/CD use case, but I might be in favor of accepting it for a broader use case that ends up including the destination information.
There can be some others users who will be having some use cases, but that was the only my use case. If some other people will see some any use case, then we can see forward to this.
Right. And if we hear from other users who have the exact destination use case, then I think we should move forward with implementing that. But until then, I think that what we would want from this issue is a description of a use case that satisfies your need and is also just obviously useful for other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for that. But also, like one last question that, okay, for the app sets things, won't it be useful for the root application where it's getting deployed to be visible through some way, or is there some way that I can figure out that, okay, where this root application is getting is deploying all these things to some place?
I'm not sure I understand the question. It sounds like you're asking about application sets, which aren't inherently tied to Source Hydrator.
No, so if I have a app set which where source hydrator has been enabled, so all those the child application which is getting generated by these app sets, and that will be having their separate manifest.yaml in which the resources destination will be visible in their specific manifest. Right. But what about the main root application where it's getting the that portion that okay, this is the namespace where it's getting deployed and all those things. So is there any way to extract that information if it's not there in somewhere in neither in manifest.yaml also?
I think that that would be an example of some piece of arbitrary information that would be useful to inject into the hydrated metadata. I think that one valid way to inject that information would be for the application set to inject somewhere in the application spec information about the parent application. I think the application spec has an info field where you can add links. That would be a good place to add the link. It also has annotations where you could add the link. In both cases, if we injected the whole application spec into the hydrator metadata, that would effectively do that linking, right? You would have that link back to the app set in the application spec, and then you could also potentially inject it somewhere more useful in the README.
Okay,
yeah, so I
got
think
it.
that's a use case for injecting the whole app spec. Injecting the whole app spec is a little spooky though, because tons of people add a ton of stuff to the app spec, sometimes things that they shouldn't, like secrets. So I don't know, that would potentially have to be an opt-in feature.
So could we consider this thing?
I think it's worth considering. I think so write up that use case. I think write up the proposal to suggest that we just inject the whole application object. And then let's go from there. Maybe we have to iterate, maybe we have to like block list certain fields or something like that.
Okay,
But
okay,
let's
sure. I'll do.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aditya. Is John or Jon here?
John, hi.
Hi, John.
It's this old one again. We've talked about this in this meeting a few times. I think the implementation has settled, and I am wondering if there is anything left to be done on it.
A review.
There
give it
there's
another look.
started a review, right? Hmm. Yeah, I see there's.
I remember we discussed about something about load tests. I see a big post from you
Yeah, it's performance
related to that.
performance analysis stuff in there. Yeah.
So this was one of the requirements that we provided. So maybe you want to present that to us. I don't know.
I can if you feel like that'd be helpful. It probably would look a lot like me reading off the post to you. But it's we
Just
basically
because this is
ended
the
up
time we have available to spend
Sure.
on the PR reviews, so
Sure.
it can be useful.
So basically what this does is when you're iterating through building the cache, it keeps track of any parent cluster scoped parents with namespace children in an index. And then when you go through building the graph on the other end, when or calculating it or emitting it in some way, those things get like reconciled into that graph. And so it actually ends up being fairly cheap in the way that it was implemented. And it scales based on the number of that kind of relationship that we have. So the overhead is negligible for cases where we don't have a lot of those relationships, and usually we don't have a lot of those relationships. But this does complete the graph here. You can see in the benchmark results there, how they were kind of laid out: 50 namespaces, 100 resources per namespace, and then a varying percentage of namespaces or of objects that have cross namespace references. You can see, in the table there, that essentially the time grows a little bit, but not terribly significantly. And there's not a terribly significant memory impact for the usual case. I would say that probably like 2% to 4% might be like the upper end of what you might find for these relationships. So it does end up being fairly cheap there. And you can see that. So the next table there has to do with how many namespaces contain any cross namespace references. And that is the previous implementation that we had talked about mostly scaled on the number of namespaces that were impacted, and this implementation doesn't. It's pretty linear with the absolute amount of those relationships that we keep track of. The index lookups are cheap. We don't need to go and build extra graph call to build extra graphs, and it's fairly, I think it's a fairly good implementation.
One thing I notice about the benchmarks as compared to the previous iterations is that these numbers really don't scare me. Like doubling, potentially tripling, that doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah. Well, so the last implementation that we talked about here actually would do it on it would build the graph kind of on the back end during iterate hierarchy. And so what we did in this case is based on the suggestion that you gave me, Michael, we actually pulled it all forward into when we're already iterating over everything in the cluster to build the cache the first time. We just kind of earmark stuff, right, for things that will need to be added into the graph when it gets built, which makes it much cheaper.
One thing that I was thinking just a couple days about this PR, I don't love opt-in, opt-out stuff. One thing, it's another option to document and maintain and potentially deprecate and remove. For another, it's, when we choose not to have two modes, we can be really darn certain that the code that isn't behind a flag is really battle tested. Given these numbers, with worst case scenario of potentially slowing down your graph construction or your cluster cache construction by 3x is just the absolute worst that we're seeing in these benchmarks, I prefer to not have a flag and just let everyone suffer a slight performance decline in order to make sure that this code gets just absolutely hammered and we can trust it.
Good.
Yeah,
if you want me to make a pass to remove that, I absolutely will. So the only reason it got added in the first place is because someone in one of these meetings asked me to add it. So you get to decide which way it should be.
It's a valid ask, but like this is not going to be cherry picked. It's going to go through RCs. I prefer just ship it, and if we have to add a flag later, we have to add it.
Okay. All right, I'll rip it out.
Yeah, so I think the last thing for this is just getting one last pass review. With KubeCon and other stuff coming up, it's going to be tough. I do want to try to get this into 3.3 though. And I got to remind myself when the cutoff for that is. December 15th. Yeah, I think we can plan to get this reviewed and in the first 2 weeks of December.
Okay. Any more
And we
comments?
can follow it up with my bigger change.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next is
It's me. I'm Zoltan. That's just my nick. Hello. So this has been an issue open for quite some time, like not terribly long time, but like over a year. And my company ran into this problem again. And I'd like to highlight here that even though the issue says this is a monorepo setup issue, it isn't really. And I'm trying to convince you about that. So how this whole setup works right now is, so like I jumped straight into it. So first, I'm not sure whether anybody wants to.
and give a little context so that everyone is in line. In the same.
So basically, the context is when an application is syncing, there are edge cases where the sync history has a bunch of commits shown up that is completely irrelevant to the current application. This might happen if the repo has 2 or more applications manifests in it, or it might happen if the repo has some extra files in it that are not the sync manifest, like some scripts or something. Any of those changes might show up in the history, which definitely seems like a flaw, because I think when a user looks at this page, from a UX perspective, they want to see the relevant changes when they are seeing this was the last sync and this is the sync status. Right now, there are cases where this is not happening, and the bigger your repo, the more often it's going to show up, because the higher rate of commits are flowing in. But even with the lowest rate of commits, this can easily happen. If somebody has autosync disabled, this can easily happen. If they are periodically triggering the sync, if they are not using webhooks to trigger the sync, then it becomes way more obvious. So there was a work going on with the manifest generate paths annotation to simplify the performance aspects of this, where you could set the application to only regard certain paths when it's generating, and then you could short circuit so that you don't incur the repo server overhead when there's irrelevant changes to the application. So that took care of the performance side. The UX side, however, is still there. The UX side is definitely there. So I started looking at some fixes, came to like some too obviously flawed conclusions, which is one of the pull requests I opened, which is, okay, let's just try doing this. This solution, one of the concerns was this is not backward compatible. So maybe this needs to be put behind a flag so that it's not rolled out to everyone, only those who are actually experiencing this issue. But the other more important issue why my first attempt is not fixing this is that there are some cases where let's say if autosync is disabled, then I can have 2 commits after each other. One is changing my service, and then there's another service, or it's another commit not changing anything regarding the application. And then a sync is triggered. The history is again gonna be polluted by the second commit, not the first relevant commit, which this fix is not really covering. So I realized this after I made the fix that we still have those edge cases as well.
I just want to understand, the initial issue is that the history contains records that are irrelevant, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's put the automation part aside. If you're doing a manual sync, I mean, you're manually
So
triggering
no, like
the place in the history, right?
so I'm not doing manual syncs. I'm not using webhooks because of our security setup, not permitting us to trigger via webhooks. So we are doing a polling based triggering, and it's already happening with the polling based auto syncing.
What I mean when I say manual sync is you can have automation outside of Argo CD that trigger the sync API. For me, that's a manual sync. You manually trigger.
We are not. It's Argo CD's built. Argo CD's built-in periodic polling and syncing that we are using. So
Okay,
there is
so
no
auto
external
sync-
triggering.
So auto sync is enabled.
Yes, auto sync is enabled in our case, but in my opinion, it shouldn't matter whether it's enabled or not. The fact is, I hit sync. I want to know whether the application actually experienced a change and show what the commit was that had the change.
Because if you're doing a manual sync, and let's say your target revision is master, then you're gonna try to sync the file in master, and you're actually gonna trigger a sync, even if there are no changes. Argo will do kubectl apply behind the scene on every resource. They will just be unchanged.
Right.
And if you have hooks configured in your sync, it will trigger hooks. So the whole sync workflow will be triggered. And that's why it's placed in the history. Because something did happen.
So even though if you are syncing on what is a master, you can still say with a definitive commit hash that actually touched the services files, because you can take that with the git rev list command saying on this particular path what was the last commit that changed files. So even if you are syncing on master, I do think you should still be displaying, by the way, I'm syncing from master, but the relevant commit, the last relevant commit to this application was this one.
I mean, just today we had a problem where our manifest path annotation were invalid and couldn't get every file. So we had to manually click the sync to be able to pick up every file. So in this case, and sometimes it's really complex to write a manifest path annotation that catches every file. In this case, people will be clicking the sync button and the application will actually never find the latest commit. So we need a way.
It would. What I'm proposing is not get that commit. What I'm proposing is do sync from master, but get the metadata from the path that changed. I mean, if you have the for example, if you're utilizing the manifest generate paths, then you need to use that spec saying, oh, by the way, these were the ones that changed. And if there's nothing changing, I would say it's fine to default to the last commit on master, like or the target revision. But the fact is, right now, I do think that metadata, that his sync history, is starting to become very useless, because I'm seeing syncs that get in there that are completely not changing my applications. And that's a problem, because then I cannot build additional functionality on history. Because that's technically the point here. Is my use case specifically is to somehow get DORA metrics on top of Argo CD applications in a simple manner. History seems like a very good point on exposing it as metrics, as DORA metrics, but then if the history is unreliable when it comes to the actual changes to the application, then I cannot build metrics on top.
Essentially, sorry,
And that
continue.
Sorry, please.
Essentially, I see we need to add another field that will reflect actual change to the application source, like change revision.
Yeah, that might be one of the approaches, I think, is to track that additional information in the status.
Today
That's
we're
likely the cleanest. That's likely the cleanest approach, because then you start with a clean state saying this field actually means that.
because we have that info today. When we call Redis, we know that we're doing a short circuit, but we don't persist that information anywhere else. Is actually an interesting advantage of Source Hydrator, and one that we're actually building on top of with a new PR that one of our team members is working on. When we hydrate the manifests, we can do a git diff and see, okay, there's nothing to change here. Like nothing's changed, so we're not going to push a commit. And when you're using Source Hydrator, that'll be helpful because we can refuse to push the commit, and like your door metrics could be based on git pushes. With our current short circuiting, we sort of do that analysis on the front end. We don't hydrate the manifest at all. We say, looking at your manifest annotations, we don't think there's anything to do, so we're just going to skip it. And I think we could persist that information in a way that gets surfaced in the UI. I don't think it's super duper duper reliable, but it's as reliable as users make it with correctly crafted paths.
Right. Definitely depends on how well you craft your repo layout and the manifest generate paths annotation content. Like in our case, I might say, like, for us, manifest generate paths is a dot. So in our case, it's very evidently easy. There might be complex use cases that depend on the user properly writing their manifest generate paths annotation. But that's a user issue, I think.
Also, it's a best effort because the data will never be accurate. Because in the end, you trigger a sync even if there's no file changed in Git. If there was resource that were out of sync, and let's say self field is not enabled, your app will sync. So your app will change Kubernetes resources. So if you're building a system that wants to track all the changes that is done by Argo, then the history will not be accurate.
Or at least duplicate, right? Like duplicating the syncs.
Evgeny is working on, and it's also Evgeny has mentioned it on the pull request. He's working on a solution that's called Argo CD non-Ruby controller, that is basically addressing this issue, and is providing a means to store this information in annotations.
Right, it's not exactly what Zoltan requires, because at its current form, at least, monorepo controller accurately tracks only the last change. But if you want history, it's not a solution. It's in its current form. If we want history, we want to do something more advanced, like adding history fields or using hydrator.
To maybe highlight my use case a little bit more, in a little bit more obvious way, is like my ultimate end goal is I have a pull request that has a hash when I'm merging it. And I want to correlate whether the sync actually happened or not in our metric system, right? And technically, it's very difficult to track down today because I don't have an obvious, okay, this was the commit arriving in the application and that triggered the sync, and it hasn't changed, so you re-expose the same hash over and over, which makes it difficult to rely on the contents of the application resource, like the status field. So ultimately, I would be in a way better situation when I could at least rely on the history actually only changing if the application manifests are changed, and that reflects this was like the last commit hash that actually changed the manifests for this application. So there's this observability track in the background that sort of motivates this work on my side.
I think that maybe there's a little more thought or design to be added on this issue, maybe a little more details. And then I think that we can either discuss it again or continue discussing it on the issue. And,
I'd be happy to keep the topic warm. Like
definitely.
I do have effort I think I can spend on it, so I would
Thank
really
you
like
for
to
raising
keep
it.
it.
This is definitely a topic that has come more than one time. So yes, thank you for taking the time to work on this, and let's continue this discussion. Thank you, Sultan.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for listening to my explanations.
Okay, Evgeny.
Okay. This is an issue that I reviewed recently. It proposes to add an option for user to configure to make git config, provide git config, global git config as a config map for Argo CD. It has some history. It's still not finished, and I want to know if there are any opinions, if it's possible to do, if it's a good idea, adding such kind of configuration.
I don't really like the idea of adding a new config map. Like we already have Argo CD CM and Argo CD CMD param CM. I think Argo CD CM is probably the best place to put this because it's already treated as kind of an admin level resource. And I think that crafting arbitrary git configs would be an admin level activity. I don't understand the use case well enough to understand whether we should just maybe hard code the git config that they're trying to set when we set up Git repositories. And I also don't know if it makes sense to instead set it at the repository secret level. So those would be my next two questions.
I see the patterns that we have for different files, different config maps like SSH config map and several other such config maps.
Evgeny, maybe you can describe a little the use case that we currently have. It's different from in this pull request, but I think it will help Michael get understand better the picture.
Recently we have discovered a very interesting, I would say, bug. It doesn't affect released Argo CD versions, but it would affect the release candidates 4.2. It's in the new Git versions. They run Git maintenance in a detached mode. It means that after that main Git command finished, just like Git fetch or something, it will run maintenance in background. So it breaks our locking, and we can have conflicts in the next with the next command that Argo CD would run. So the way to disable this behavior is to
Sorry,
change
Eugene, sorry to interrupt. Is this the bug that you just the feature or bug that you just described? Is there a link somewhere in this ticket that we can refer to understand it?
It's not related to this ticket, but this ticket is a way to fix to provide fix. Or we provide fix in a config map in a default value of config map, or we hard code the fix like adding Git configuration in image in Argo CD image.
Leo, the problem that Evgeny is talking about is the problem that I was raising the last contributor meetings and the discussion that we were having over the headlock and index lock Git files. So this is related to that. Evgeny has.
We suppose it's
Probably.
related. We are not sure
Right.
100%,
So
but
I guess,
it's
and then-
very likely.
Yeah, but my point is I'd like to read some documentation based on what you described to understand what this new feature of Git does, and to have that link somewhere in the main ticket in Argo.
I will open different ticket because it's not related
That's
to
fine.
this pull
That's fine.
request.
All I'm asking
And
is a link.
we are not 100% sure that it's discovered yesterday. With
Sure.
It will be described as a serious issue if it really is the case.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, it will be good to have it well documented. It's fine to be a second separate issue. Thank you.
So essentially, the proposal to put this into Argo CD CM. And there are no objections for adding this such a parameter.
So there is already an objection, right? So Michael already explained the objection. We don't want to introduce a new config map in the project. So if you want to introduce this, it needs to go in the main Argo CD config map.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we're 2 minutes over time. It means that the next topics will be at the beginning of the next meetings. Thanks everyone for participating, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Reggie. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Reggie.